Nobody knew that after every concert, when the lights dimmed and the crowds went home, Freddie Mercury would slip away into the darkness for a secret mission that would change his life forever. What he did in those quiet hospital corridors wasn't just kindness. It was something that would transform the very soul of rock and roll's greatest performer. But the story I'm about to tell you, the story of a dying 7-year-old boy named Tommy and Freddie's final song, wasn't supposed to survive. They tried to bury it. They tried to erase it from history. But one nurse kept a secret recording that would reveal the most heartbreaking truth about the man behind the legend. Picture this. London, November 1985. Wembley Stadium had just witnessed one of Queen's most electrifying performances. 80,000 fans had screamed themselves hoarse, thrown flowers at the stage, and worshipped their idol with religious fervor. Freddie Mercury had commanded that stage like a god, his voice soaring through "We Are the Champions" as confetti cannons exploded around him. But as the last echo of applause faded and the stadium emptied, something extraordinary happened that none of those fans could have imagined. While his bandmates headed to the after-party, while journalists waited for interviews, while the music industry celebrated another Queen triumph, Freddie Mercury quietly slipped out a back exit. No entourage, no security, just a man in a simple coat, carrying a small guitar case, walking through the cold London night toward Great Ormond Street Hospital. This wasn't his first visit. It wouldn't be his last. But what happened that November night would haunt him for the rest of his life. You see, there was something about Freddie that even his closest friends didn't fully understand. Behind all the theatrical grandeur, behind the flamboyant costumes and larger-than-life persona, lived a man who was quietly fighting his own battle with mortality. He'd been diagnosed just months earlier, and the weight of that secret was crushing him. But instead of retreating into self-pity, Freddie had discovered something that gave his remaining time meaning. In the children's AIDS ward at Great Ormond Street, he found souls who understood what it meant to face the unthinkable with courage. The head nurse, Margaret Patterson, had initially been skeptical when Freddie first appeared at the hospital 6 months earlier. Rock stars didn't typically show up unannounced at children's hospitals, especially not at midnight. But there was something different about this one. He didn't come with cameras or publicity teams. He didn't want recognition or tax benefits. He simply asked if he could spend time with the children who were too sick to attend his concerts. The first night he came, Margaret would later recall in a journal entry that surfaced decades after her death, "I thought it was some sort of publicity stunt. But then, I watched him sit with 8-year-old Emma, who was dying of AIDS-related complications. He didn't perform for her. He didn't sing. He just held her hand and listened to her talk about her favorite songs. When she fell asleep, he sat there for 3 hours, just watching over her like a guardian angel." But here's what made these visits extraordinary. Freddie never just visited. He transformed the entire ward into something magical. He would arrive with his small acoustic guitar and create impromptu concerts for children who had lost hope. Not the bombastic Queen performances the world knew, but intimate, tender moments where his voice became medicine for broken spirits. Dr. Sarah Williams, who worked in the AIDS pediatric unit, witnessed something she'd never seen in her 20-year career. These children were dying, she explained in a rare interview years later. They were scared, isolated, and often in tremendous pain. But when Freddie sang to them, something changed in their eyes. It wasn't just entertainment. It was like he was giving them permission to still be children, to still dream, to still hope. The visits became more frequent as Freddie's own health declined. What started as monthly trips became weekly, then twice weekly. He would finish a concert in Manchester and drive through the night to London just to spend an hour with a child who was having a difficult night. He learned their names, their favorite songs, their fears, and their dreams. He became Uncle Freddie to dozens of children who had been abandoned by a world that was terrified of their disease. But it was Tommy Morrison who changed everything. Tommy was 7 years old when he arrived at Great Ormond Street in October 1985. He'd contracted HIV through a blood transfusion during heart surgery when he was 3. By the time Freddie met him, Tommy had outlived every medical prediction. The doctors gave him weeks to live. But Tommy had been defying those predictions for months, sustained by something the medical team couldn't quantify, an unshakable optimism and a love for music that seemed to keep his spirit alive when his body was failing. The first time Freddie encountered Tommy, the boy was in the hospital's small music room, sitting at an old, out-of-tune piano, trying to play Bohemian Rhapsody with tiny fingers that could barely reach the keys. He was getting the notes wrong, his timing was off, but he was singing every word with perfect pitch and absolute joy. Freddie stood in the doorway for 10 minutes, listening to this dying child pour his heart into his song. "Tommy," Freddie said softly, walking into the room. "That's a beautiful song. Do you know who wrote it?" Tommy looked up with eyes that seemed too old for his young face. "Freddie Mercury," he said matter-of-factly. "He's the best singer in the whole world. Mummy used to play his songs when I was scared." "Your mummy had excellent taste," Freddie replied, sitting down beside the boy at the piano. "Would you like me to show you the right chords?" What happened next was captured in Margaret Patterson's journal. "I watched from the hallway as this global superstar spent 2 hours teaching a dying 7-year-old how to play his most famous song. Tommy's hands were so small, so weak, but Freddie was endlessly patient. When Tommy finally managed to play the opening bars correctly, his face lit up with such pure joy that I had to step away to cry. But Tommy wasn't just another child in the ward. There was something about his spirit, his absolute refusal to give up, that spoke to something deep in Freddie's soul. Perhaps it was because they were both facing the same disease. Perhaps it was because Tommy reminded Freddie of his own childhood struggles with being different. Or perhaps it was simply that in Tommy's unconditional love for music, Freddie saw the pure reason why he had been given his gift in the first place. As Tommy's condition worsened through November, Freddie's visits became daily. He would finish recording sessions and drive straight to the hospital. He brought Tommy a small keyboard that he could play in bed. He taught him harmonies to Queen songs. Most importantly, he helped Tommy write his own songs. Simple melodies about rainbows and flying and seeing his mother again. Dr. Williams documented one particularly moving evening. Tommy was having severe breathing difficulties, and we thought he might not make it through the night. Freddie arrived around midnight and found Tommy struggling to sleep. Instead of his usual upbeat songs, Freddie began singing lullabies, not Queen songs but gentle melodies he seemed to create in the moment. Tommy's breathing steadied, his pulse normalized, and he slept peacefully for the first time in days. The nursing staff began to notice something extraordinary. On nights when Freddie visited, not just Tommy but the entire ward seemed calmer. Other children would gather in doorways to listen. Parents found hope they thought they'd lost. Even the medical equipment seemed to beat more quietly, as if the machines themselves were respecting these sacred moments. But as December approached, both Freddie and the medical team knew Tommy's time was running short. The little boy who had defied every medical prediction was finally losing his battle. His body was shutting down, and there was nothing more the doctors could do except try to keep him comfortable. It was on December 15, 1985, that the moment occurred which would change Freddie Mercury forever. Tommy had been drifting in and out of consciousness for 3 days. His parents had said their goodbyes. The medical team had done everything possible. As evening approached, Freddie sat beside Tommy's bed, holding the boy's small hand, watching his labored breathing and knowing that these might be their final moments together. "Uncle Freddie," Tommy whispered, his voice barely audible. "Will you sing me the song about love? The one that makes me think about Mummy?" Freddie knew exactly which song Tommy meant. "Love of My Life" had become Tommy's favorite during their sessions together. But tonight, as Freddie looked at this brave little boy who was fighting for every breath, the weight of the moment threatened to overwhelm him. "Of course, darling," Freddie whispered back, his voice already thick with emotion. "But tonight, you have to help me sing it. Can you do that?" Tommy nodded weakly, and Freddie began to sing, his voice gentle and achingly tender. But what happened next would haunt Freddie for the rest of his life. As they reached the chorus, Tommy's voice joined in, clear and strong despite his failing body. For those few moments, the pain seemed to leave his face. His breathing eased, his grip on Freddie's hand tightened, and in his eyes there was nothing but peace and love and the pure joy of making music with his hero. But it was the final verse that broke something inside Freddie forever. As they sang the last lines together, Tommy looked directly into Freddie's eyes and whispered, "Uncle Freddie, when I see Mummy in heaven, I'm going to tell her that you taught me her favorite song, and I'm going to sing it for her, just like we practiced." Those were Tommy Morrison's last words. He closed his eyes during the final note and passed away peacefully, still holding Freddie's hand, with the echo of their duet hanging in the air like a prayer. Nurse Patterson, who had been watching from the doorway, later wrote, "I have never seen a human being break the way Freddie Mercury broke in that moment. This man, who commanded stadiums, who was beloved by millions, who seemed invincible under the stage lights, completely shattered. He held Tommy's hand for an hour after he was gone, crying like I'd never seen anyone cry. What happened in the days following Tommy's death revealed the true depth of Freddie's transformation. Instead of retreating into grief, he threw himself into his hospital visits with even greater intensity. It was as if Tommy's courage in those final moments had shown him something profound about the power of music to transcend even death itself. Dr. Williams observed a change. After Tommy died, Freddie's approach to these visits changed completely. Before, he was bringing joy to dying children. After Tommy, he was bringing something deeper. He was teaching them how to die without fear. He helped them understand that music could carry their love beyond death, just like Tommy had planned to sing for his mother in heaven. The other children in the ward noticed the change too. Freddie began incorporating Tommy's story into his visits, not in a sad way but as a source of hope. He would tell them about a brave little boy who wasn't afraid because he knew that love and music were stronger than anything else in the universe. But the most profound change was in Freddie's music itself. The songs he wrote after Tommy's death carried a different emotional weight. There was a tenderness in his voice that hadn't been there before, an understanding of fragility that made every note more precious. He began to see his concerts not just as entertainment, but as opportunities to create the same kind of healing moments he'd shared with Tommy. Margaret Patterson's journal documents dozens of similar moments over the following months. Children who found peace in their final hours because Freddie had taught them that music was a bridge between worlds. Parents who found comfort knowing their children's last memories were filled with beauty rather than fear. Medical staff who witnessed miracles they couldn't explain as Freddie's presence seemed to ease suffering in ways medicine couldn't touch. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of these visits was how secret they remained. In an era before cell phones and social media, Freddie's hospital visits stayed hidden from the public eye. He had asked the hospital staff to sign confidentiality agreements, not to protect his reputation, but to protect the privacy of the children and families. These weren't publicity stunts or charitable photo opportunities. They were sacred moments between a dying man and dying children, united by the universal language of music. As 1986 progressed and Freddie's own health declined, his visits became even more poignant. He was now facing the same fears, the same uncertainty, the same physical deterioration as the children he comforted. But instead of seeking comfort for himself, he seemed to find strength in being strong for others. Dr. Williams observed this paradox. Here was a man who was probably terrified about his own diagnosis, his own mortality, but he spent his remaining energy helping children face their deaths with courage. It was like he was using their bravery to teach himself how to be brave. The final visit that has been documented occurred in September 1991, just 2 months before Freddie's own death. By this time, he was too weak to perform concerts, too sick to record in the studio. But he still made his way to Great Ormond Street Hospital one last time. The child he visited that night was Sarah, an 8-year-old girl who reminded the staff heartbreakingly of Tommy. She had the same bright spirit, the same love for music, the same refusal to let her illness steal her joy. When Freddie arrived, Sarah was unconscious, her parents keeping vigil beside her bed. Nurse Patterson, now head of the ward, watched as Freddie sat beside Sarah's bed and began to sing softly. The same song he had sung to Tommy 6 years earlier. As his voice filled the room, Sarah's eyes opened. She looked at Freddie and smiled. "Are you the angel who sings to children?" she whispered. "No, darling," Freddie replied, tears streaming down his face. "I'm just someone who learned from angels like you that music never really ends." Sarah lived for 3 more weeks after that visit, and according to her parents, she spent those final days teaching other children in the ward the songs Freddie had sung to her. When she died, her last words were about wanting to meet Tommy in heaven so he could teach her more music. The ripple effect of Freddie's hospital visits continued long after his death in November 1991. The children he had comforted grew up to become musicians, doctors, teachers, and parents who carried his message forward. Parents who had watched their children die peacefully while holding on to hope became advocates for other families facing similar struggles. But perhaps the most lasting legacy was in the way these visits changed our understanding of Freddie Mercury himself. For decades after his death, the public knew him as the flamboyant performer, the theatrical genius, the voice of a generation. But the hospital staff, the families, and the few children who survived carried a different memory of a man who used his greatest gift, not for fame or fortune, but to help the most vulnerable souls on earth face their darkest moments with light. Margaret Patterson kept detailed records of Freddie's visits until her retirement. In her final journal entry about those years, she wrote, "People ask me what Freddie Mercury was really like, and I tell them this. He was a man who understood that true greatness isn't measured by the size of your audience, but by the depth of your compassion." He could have spent his final years feeling sorry for himself, but instead he chose to be a light in the darkness for children who needed to believe in magic. The secret recording that Nurse Patterson made of Freddie's final song with Tommy was discovered among her personal effects after her death in 2019. When it was finally shared with the world, the response was overwhelming. Music critics called it the most moving performance of Freddie's career. Fans said it finally revealed the man behind the legend. But for those who had been in that hospital room that December night in 1985, it was simply a reminder of what they had always known, that Freddie Mercury's greatest performance wasn't on any stage, but in those quiet moments when he helped a dying child find peace through music. Today, Great Ormond Street Hospital has a small plaque in the music room where Freddie first met Tommy. It reads, "In memory of all the children who taught us that music is stronger than fear, and love is stronger than death. But those who were there during those sacred visits know that the real memorial isn't made of bronze or stone. It's in the countless lives that were touched by a man who discovered that his greatest gift wasn't his voice. It was his ability to use that voice to heal hearts that were breaking." The story of Freddie Mercury's secret hospital visits reminds us that heroism isn't always public. Sometimes the most profound acts of courage happen in quiet rooms, away from cameras and crowds. Sometimes the greatest performances are witnessed only by those who need them most. And sometimes the most important songs are sung not to thousands, but to one small child who needs to believe that love really can last forever. But the story doesn't end with Freddie's death. Because what Tommy Morrison and those other brave children taught him about courage and love would continue to ripple through the world in ways no one could have predicted. In 1992, just months after Freddie's passing, something extraordinary happened at Great Ormond Street Hospital. A young music therapist named David Chen was working with a group of children in the AIDS ward, when one of them, a 9-year-old boy named Marcus, began humming a melody that stopped David in his tracks. It was "Love of My Life," but sung with a tenderness and understanding that seemed impossible from someone so young. "Where did you learn that song?" David asked gently. Marcus looked up with eyes that held secrets beyond his years. "Tommy taught it to me before he went to heaven. He said a singing angel showed him how to make the sad parts beautiful." David realized he was witnessing something profound. These children were teaching each other Freddie's songs, passing down not just melodies, but the emotional healing techniques Freddie had discovered. Without knowing it, they had created a musical legacy that was spreading through the hospital like medicine. Dr. Williams, still working in the ward 5 years after Tommy's death, began documenting this phenomenon. She discovered that survival rates in the pediatric AIDS unit had improved significantly since Freddie's visits began. Children were living longer, fighting harder, and most remarkably, dying more peacefully when their time came. It wasn't just psychological, Dr. Williams noted in her research. We were seeing measurable improvements in immune function, pain tolerance, and overall quality of life. Somehow, Freddie's music sessions had created a healing environment that medicine alone couldn't achieve. The secret began to spread beyond the hospital walls through an unexpected source: the parents. Maria Santos, whose daughter Elena had been one of Freddie's final visits, started a support group for families dealing with pediatric AIDS. In their meetings, she would share the songs Elena had learned from Uncle Freddie and tell stories about the courage her daughter had found through music. Elena lived 8 months longer than doctors predicted. Maria would tell other families. But more importantly, she lived those months without fear. She would tell me that Uncle Freddie taught her that dying wasn't scary, because the music would carry her love to wherever she was going. These support group meetings began incorporating music therapy sessions based on the techniques parents had observed during Freddie's visits. Word spread quietly through London's medical community, and soon other hospitals were requesting training in what became known as the Mercury method, using intimate, personalized musical experiences to help terminally ill children process their emotions and find peace. But perhaps the most remarkable discovery came in 1995, when researchers at Johns Hopkins Hospital in Baltimore began studying the long-term effects of music therapy on pediatric patients. Dr. Amanda Richardson, who was leading the study, received a call from Dr. Williams in London about the unusual patterns they had observed at Great Ormond Street. We compared survival rates, pain management effectiveness, and psychological well-being indicators, before and after 1985, Dr. Richardson explained in her groundbreaking paper. The improvements were so significant that we initially thought there had been a change in medical protocols. When we discovered the only variable was Freddie Mercury's volunteer work, we realized we were looking at evidence of something medicine was only beginning to understand: the physiological impact of emotional healing. The research led to a revolution in pediatric care. Hospitals around the world began implementing music therapy programs, but none achieved the same results as the original sessions at Great Ormond Street. It took years for medical professionals to understand why. The difference wasn't in the music itself, it was in the relationship. Freddie hadn't just performed for these children, he had seen them as complete human beings with stories, dreams, and wisdom to share. He had approached each child not as a patient to be pitied, but as a teacher who could show him something profound about courage and love. Margaret Patterson, in her final interviews before her death, revealed details that had never been shared publicly. Freddie would spend hours just listening to these children talk about their fears, their dreams, their families. He remembered every detail about their lives. When little Sarah mentioned she missed her grandmother's cooking, Freddie showed up the next week with homemade biscuits he had learned to bake just for her. These small acts of attention and love had created something unprecedented, a healing environment based on genuine human connection rather than medical intervention. The children responded not just to the music, but to being truly seen and valued by someone who could have been anywhere else in the world. As word of Freddie's hospital work finally began to emerge in the late 1990s, it created a movement that extended far beyond medical settings. Musicians around the world began volunteering at hospitals, homeless shelters, and care facilities. But they quickly learned that showing up with good intentions wasn't enough. They needed to approach these visits with the same depth of commitment and genuine care that Freddie had demonstrated. The Tommy Morrison Foundation, established by Tommy's parents in 1997, became a training center for musicians who wanted to work with terminally ill children. The foundation's approach was based entirely on principles observed during Freddie's visits. Treat each child as an individual. Listen more than you perform, and remember that your role is to serve their emotional needs, not your own ego. John Morrison, Tommy's father, became an unexpected advocate for music therapy research. In interviews, he would describe watching his son's transformation during Freddie's visits. Tommy was dying, and we all knew it. But those evenings with Freddie weren't about death. They were about life. My son learned that his life had meaning, that his voice mattered, that the love he felt for us would continue even after his body gave up. The foundation's work attracted attention from researchers studying the connection between emotional state and immune function. Dr. Sarah Chen, no relation to David Chen, the music therapist, led a longitudinal study following children who had participated in Tommy Morrison Foundation programs. Her findings, published in the New England Journal of Medicine in 2003, provided scientific validation for what hospital staff had observed for years. Children who participated in these intensive music therapy relationships showed measurable improvements in natural killer cell activity, reduced cortisol levels, and enhanced production of endorphins. Dr. Chen reported, but the most significant finding was in their approach to treatment compliance and pain management. Children who felt emotionally supported were more willing to undergo difficult treatments and reported lower pain levels. The research attracted the attention of Roger Taylor, Brian May, and John Deacon, who had been largely unaware of the full extent of Freddie's hospital work. In 2004, they established the Freddie Mercury Foundation for Pediatric Music Therapy, funding research and training programs around the world. Brian May, speaking at the foundation's launch, reflected on his bandmate's secret mission. For 20 years, we thought we knew everything about Freddie. We knew his ambitions, his fears, his incredible talent. But we didn't know about his greatest achievement. While we were making music for the world, he was making music for individual souls who needed it most. The foundation's work revealed the scope of Freddie's impact. Hospital records showed he had visited over 300 children during his 6 years of volunteer work. Follow-up studies found that children who had survived their illnesses carried the emotional tools they learned from Freddie throughout their lives, often becoming advocates, healthcare workers, or musicians themselves. Dr. Williams, now retired but still consulting for pediatric music therapy programs, reflected on the lasting impact. Those children Freddie visited didn't just receive comfort, they learned a philosophy of living. They learned that pain doesn't have to mean suffering, that fear can be transformed into courage, and that love expressed through music can heal wounds that medicine can't touch. In 2015, 30 years after Tommy Morrison's death, Great Ormond Street Hospital opened the Mercury Music Therapy Center, a dedicated space designed specifically for intimate musical healing sessions. The center's design was based on detailed descriptions from staff who had witnessed Freddie's visits. Small, comfortable rooms with excellent acoustics, soft lighting, and space for family members to participate. The opening ceremony featured a performance by children who were current patients at the hospital. They sang "Love of My Life," arranged in the gentle, intimate style that Freddie had developed for his hospital visits. In the audience, now adult survivors of the original pediatric AIDS ward wept as they heard the song that had carried them through their darkest moments. Sarah Martinez, who had survived her childhood illness and become a pediatric nurse, spoke at the ceremony. "Freddie Mercury saved my life, but not in the way people usually mean. He didn't cure my disease. Medicine did that. He saved my life by teaching me that even in the darkest moments, there is still beauty, still love, still reason to hope." Today, the Mercury method is taught in medical schools around the world. Music therapy has become a standard component of pediatric care, and the principles Freddie discovered through his relationship with Tommy Morrison have influenced everything from pain management protocols to grief counseling techniques. But perhaps the most profound legacy is in the children themselves. Those who survived and those who didn't, each carried forward the lesson that Tommy had whispered to Freddie in his final moments, that love and music are stronger than death, that every voice matters, and that the songs we share with each other can echo through eternity. In the end, Freddie Mercury gave those children something more precious than entertainment. He gave them the knowledge that they were not alone, that their lives had meaning, and that the music they made together would echo through eternity. And in return, they gave him something even more valuable. They showed him how to face death not as an ending, but as a final, beautiful note in a song that would never truly end.